right, I'm going to get this started here this evening. Once again, thanks for joining us here from the Music First team. The topic of tonight's conversation is going to be the I wish I had known tips and strategies. And we've got Dr. Keith Dye is going to be leading the conversation this evening. He is the senior education consultant here with our company and an all-around wealth of knowledge. And my name is Mike Olander. For most of you, you've probably exchanged emails or phone conversations with me over the last several months. Thanks again for joining us. Tonight here, I'm going to give you a real quick idea here. Here's kind of what we're looking at in terms of agenda. Keith's going to talk a little bit about some tips and strategies around user management, as well as class management inside of the platform, including talking about setting up groups inside of classes, talking about reusing different types of tasks and how to effectively utilize that. We're going to talk a little bit about where and how to get some help, as well as leaving time at the end for some Q&A topics. In terms of housekeeping, just a couple of real quick things. Because we are doing this recording, if you are not able to take notes, or like I said, if you've got some peers and colleagues that you are also sharing a MusicFirst Classroom implementation with, feel free to email me, Mike at musicfirst.com. You can request, and once the meeting is done, it will render. We'll get the video of the meeting uploaded to a shareable site that then I can send that link privately to you. We are going to ask everybody just in terms of bandwidth, and also to keep everything clean in terms of the screens, keep your cameras off and mute your microphones. I'll try to moderate that as well. And then use the chat box if you've got questions. I will either be answering, or when we get to the Q&A, I will reiterate what those questions are for Keith as well. Okay, finally, I've got three great go-tos here. These are kind of some real fantastic ideas and options. The first is the user guide and the tutorials section inside of the MusicFirst Classroom. I've got a little bit of a screen share there. When you log into your MusicFirst Classroom, this is part of that header bar at the top. On the right-hand side, you'll see that question mark icon inside the circle. If you ever are not sure about how to do something, a great spot to help, especially if it's odd hours of the day, click on that question mark icon. That gets you directly to our user guide as well as tutorial videos. The support team. If you have not interacted with our support team, they are fantastic. They're the people that you want to connect with anytime you see any type of an error message that you're trying to resolve, or any of the how do I type of questions. If you were familiar with the old Who Wants to Be a Millionaire game show, the phone a friend option, that's our support team. Support at musicfirst.com. Just a quick aside, if you are going to email them, I typically recommend include the website address for your site. And if you've got a specific student that's having a problem, include the username of the student. If you're having a problem with a specific task, the information about what the name of the course and the task link is, you can copy that website address, maybe even a screenshot. That really helps them get you the exact answer that you're looking for as quick as possible. And then the education manager, which for most of you is myself. Although if you're not sure who your education manager is, I've got the link to our website. The contact us page shows a map, and it tells you exactly who your folks are. We're the folks that help you out with proposals if you kind of want to talk through your vision and what you want to look to do. If you've got an existing implementation and you need to add seats or potentially add some additional software to help with your implementation, questions about your renewal dates, any of that, it's great. So there you go. Last screen. Once again, thank you. And do know that our team, we want to help you guys out. So if you do need assistance, please, please, please reach out. Don't think that you're on a deserted island and you have a volleyball and some charcoal that you're making your own friend, and that's the only person you talk to. Please reach out to us. Let us know. We're here to help. And I've got our contact information for both myself as well as Keith up on the screen. All right. So without any further ado, I am going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to turn it over to Keith Dye.
All right, everybody. Good afternoon.
You're muted.
Sorry, I got remuted there. Didn't know it. I'm good for that at least once a day. I was just going to say good afternoon. Welcome. I'm glad you took the time at the end of the day to join. I know it's real easy to not do something like this at the end of the day after you've worked so hard. Trust me, I was a public school band director for 20 years before I went into higher ed, and I know how hard you work all day long and how taxing it is. And in this time, it's only, if not more taxing, much more complicated for all of you. And I know all of you have each individual problems, and we hope MusicFirst can be big part of the solution for those problems. What I'm going to pretty much go over today are just some things that a lot of you probably already know. I apologize for any redundancy of things you already know. Just consider yourself, if I do bring things up that you're already doing, that, hey, you're on the right track, you're doing things the right way. Also, as Mike said, if you got anything during the course of everything, if you want to put it into the chat, we'll jump on that and leave some time at the end. Okay, so I'm going to jump right in here. First thing I want to do, let me share my screen here for a second. And while we're doing this, gotta make sure I go to the right one. I'm a music education professor at Texas Tech University in Lubbock, Texas, and have been here for, this is my 16th year. And we use MusicFirst as the learning management system and have for the last 4 years in all of our music education coursework, including a lot of graduate programs, a lot of graduate program coursework. And even though we don't use software for the most part, other than if it's a technology course in the graduate level, we just like the learning management system itself so much better than our campus-wide system, which in our case is Blackboard, which is just overly complicated in our opinion and doesn't really serve our needs and that. So I'm a big believer in it for sure. What I wanted to talk about at the very beginning here, I'm going to shift something over just a little bit, is one, again, I want to highlight what Mike talked through is the help menu. Please, I know none of us like doing anything and reading the instructions if it's, you know, putting together something you purchased, or whether it's we're learning a new program, or you get an email with a link to more details about something that's changed on your bank account or credit card or something. We do not like reading any of that stuff. We like to kind of wing it, figure it out for ourselves, or completely ignore it. But these are very, if you haven't really looked through these, you really owe it yourself, especially with a break coming up for most of you. I hope for at least a day or two next week. You know, maybe take 30 minutes and just kind of walk through and see what's there. It's a very palatable user guide. Lots of images. Of course, the tutorials are all videos. Many of them are less than a minute long, get right to the heart of things, but they can really be a lifesaver for you and really help you get more out of what you're paying for in terms of use and so forth. So don't forget that. You also get Mike's picture when you click on it. So, you know, there's that added bonus. The other thing is just some typical first time problems. And I, of course, some of you may have been using this for 3 or 4 years and joined us. Some of you, maybe because of COVID, you're new to it and you've just kind of hit the ground running like you have in so many different aspects of your teaching over the last 6 months. So I may be kind of preaching to the choir here with this, but you know, anything you do that involves instructions, you can predict there are going to be problems. Again, because people don't fully read, students really don't fully read. And, you know, there are just some typical things. Really, truly, when kids sign on, they only need 3 pieces of information. They need the URL for your MusicFirst account. They need their username and they need their password, and that's it. They also need the information that they'll be most successful if they're using the Chrome browser on almost every device, and then of course using our MusicFirst Student app on iOS devices, iPads and iPhones, that they have that. I did want to talk just for a second, and you have to have an administrator view to do this, and I hope most of you do, the lead director. If not, you can get with your administrator of your account, and for a period of time anyway, they could make you this. When you look at your users, I don't know if all of you have ever seen this or not, but I recommend strongly to use student ID numbers. If your kids know their student ID numbers, which in most cases they use that for lunch back when we were all at school, eating lunch at school. And so it's a confidential number that allows you then to create a generic password for everybody. And I don't know if you've noticed, but if you are an administrator, when you go to the student view, you have the ability to lock both the usernames and the passwords. Because I know with everything else going on, one of the very first problems that you have is that a kid goes in, they get in the first time, and of course they've got to go in and they discover they can change their username or their password to something that they consider more appealing. And then they promptly forget what the heck it was. And you've got to go in and re-enter their password or something. It just makes for a consistent nagging kind of thing from the students in that. So I strongly recommend using student ID numbers or some sort of identification number that they absolutely know, and then just a generic password. And the more generic, the better. I mean, hell, just use the word music in lower cases or something like that, and such. So that's kind of step one, just right out of the box there. Second thing I wanted to talk about that I know is just kind of intuitive, it maybe isn't the most intuitive thing, is when you title your classes. Different people have asked me over the time, how do I reorganize my screen? So if I've got, and hopefully you don't have as many classes as I do, but you can see I've got a number of classes here. We're looking at a dozen classes right here. Well, what I wanted to do, some of these are classes that I'm just keeping up here so I can access them for materials from them from past years and things. But notice I started the labeling of my current classes that I'm engaged with the year. So this defaults by a sort to a numeric alpha sort. And so whether you use, like I have 2020, whether you want to just number the classes, and realize at any time I can go in here, even if I've already set these up, I can go into class details and I can change that title and update it. And that really can be a big saver. One thing I do want to show you though, I've got to unshare my screen here and then reshare to show you this. I've got two MusicFirst windows open right now. As you can see in this one, for the single digit numbers, you have to use a 0 at the front end. Otherwise it would go 1, 10, 11, etc. So if you do want to do that, where you actually want to specifically specify what the order of your classes are, if you're as OCD as me, then this is actually set up for an assignment for one of my classes. My students are making a MusicFirst Classroom on a demo site. But as you can see, 01 in the title results 02 in the title, and that. Okay. Next thing I wanted to show you, and again, I'm going to reshare back to the other screen. Whoops, it's the wrong one. Apologies. If you haven't already discovered, and this is kind of a no-brainer, but again, as you're in the fury of the fight, if you will, I love these shortcuts. The fact that I can go straight to my calendar, my gradebook, my overview, but also up here on the cog icon, I can go to teacher management or I can go to student management. Let's not touch the duplicate class. There is a great video in here on duplicating your class. So if you renew your class, want to at semester or at the academic year, don't forget that that's there. We're not going to go into that today. And of course, my class details. But almost exclusively, the first thing I will do is if I'm going to go in and look at a class, and I'll just use this one for right now, I'll go to the overview. You have the option of organizing here headers and then dragging and dropping assignments, whatever you'd like to refer to them as, tasks, assessments, assignments, lessons within each of those. So this is from my brass class currently. So I have, practice assessments using MusicFirst. They're on their second instrument right now. We have a weekly quiz. I have those categorized. They have 4 video observations, and they had MusicFirst assessments from their first instrument. However, this is organized on this page, that is what the students are going to see when they go into their class. So if you want something at the top of the list, you can do that. Also on yours, if something, let me get back down here, anything that isn't visible, so in other words, these have not been made visible, these are from a prior year, anything I have hidden, I can see them still, but the students can't see them. All right, so you have that ability there. And also, and again, you guys have probably seen this, is don't neglect that on the class overview. You have the opportunity to have class pages with pertinent information, but more importantly, class files. Take advantage of the fact that these are things that your students, wherever they are, they can have access to, whether it's PDFs, whether it's Word documents, whether it's MP3 files, you can put into class files. You have that and they can do it. So while MusicFirst is a classroom management system, not a program management system, the class files actually does function somewhat like some of the better offerings of a program management system within your classroom, especially for instructional materials and so forth. Okay. Next thing I want to go into is gradebook management. What some of you have probably discovered by this point in the semester, if you've been using this all year and giving, let's say, 2 to 4 assignments a week in that, is the gradebook relatively quickly becomes a little overwhelmed, if you will. Now, I only have 3 students in this class this semester because since we're not meeting live, I just offered it as an independent study. Actually, I'm going to go to a different class to give you a broader view of a gradebook that would look more like your gradebook. All right. I'm really destroying FERPA law right now, but I don't think my students would mind on this because they're all doing really well in the class. So you'll notice here, they have to do arrangement assignments. So this is scores they've submitted. This is reading responses. This is assignment projects. I have created assessment groups. This is the best thing in the world. Really think about the kinds of assignments you're giving and create assessment groups. Again, any of these, you can delete and edit them after you have them here. But the unique and I think really cool part about this is that the students see how they're doing within each category of assessment. So if they do really well on one thing, but you're still making a less than what they think they should be getting grade wise, you can easily go in here and say, yeah, you do great on this, but you're really irresponsible on getting these done. We'll take this first student here. He's got 382 out of 500 points on this part of the project or this part of the grade. It becomes kind of black and white to them. And also it helps you. The other thing you can do as you do it is I can go in here and I can just look at one particular area. If you've not noticed, it does give you the average score for each assignment so that if you want to go in and modify scores, you can, if you're going to do something on a curve or whatever. And then any of you, if I don't know if you've thought about this or not, by default, an awful lot of grading we do is, and the way the program is set up, goes to percentage grade. The problem with percentage grade, though, is it's very difficult to do weighted grading. If you use point totals instead, total points, you can use a weighted system. So if, you know, scores, if these scores are worth 100 points, 200 points, you know, if this one's 500 points, these are just worth 50 points. It allows me to have weighted grading without doing any fancy math. And of course, the program does all the math for me within that. So remember that as you're setting things up, but that is something every time you create an assignment or whatever, you do have to choose that option. If you've already set up things that are a percentage, if you go back in and change it to points, even if kids have completed it, in most cases, it will change it for you. So this isn't something that can't be undone like so many things. Then the other feature I wanted to show you on the grade book that, again, I think so many people miss is this reorder grades. So as you make things, you may discover that your grade book is a semi-chronological, just big mess. But once you pick that reorder grades, you'll see whatever assessment groups you've made. And within these assessment groups, you can change the appearance or listing of assignments. I can change things from one assessment group to another as I want to. And so you can tailor everything, including just not having certain things in an assessment group at all. Just make sure after you've moved stuff around that you save changes. And if those lists are pretty long, that may be way off the screen down in the lower right-hand corner. So watch that. All right. Next thing I want to go into is roster management. Of course, student management is here. When I click on it, I can see students and groups and invitations. I'm going to be just using probably, and you do right now, mostly just students. The other thing is, as you may remember, that if I knew going in, if you want to save yourself a couple clicks, which these days when we're on computers so much, you may be really conscious of, I can just go into that through here through student management. And that immediately just takes me to the student view. Same thing there, as you can see. Of course, you have three functions here. I can add an existing student, which is adding a student that's already in the MusicFirst system. So if you have a student that moves from 5th period to 2nd period, or if you're doing this district-wide, a student that moves in from another campus and they're also using MusicFirst, you can find that student and add them. If I have a move in from another district or another school that doesn't use MusicFirst, I can just add them here. And then finally, I can create student groups. And if you're ensemble directors, you know, you think in terms of student groups all the time. When you think about your band, choir, or orchestra, you think about voice parts. You think about instrument parts, flutes, and so forth. Unfortunately, the student group mechanism, if you have very large groups, is a little tedious. So if I want to put my violins all together in this group, I have to go in and find them, accumulate my list, and then save the changes. I'm not going to do that for this class right there. So it's a little bit more tedious. Now, with that said, if you've got a 60-piece ensemble to put those kids into instrumental groups, like let's just say it's a band, you're probably looking at 5 to 8 minutes that's going to take you at the most if you've never done it before. The other thing within this too, within the student groups that you may not know is you can make, kids can be members of student groups, as many student groups as you wish them to be. Now you may say, okay, so why student groups? Well, the reason is when you're creating or making assignments of tasks and assessments and lessons is if you uncheck the assign to all box in that aspect, you will also automatically pop up all of your student groups and the option for individual students. So you can be very, very specific about who gets what assignment. So when you're doing differentiated instruction, when you're creating a some sort of assignment that only go to, let's say, your tenors and basses in a choral program, you can differentiate that there. You don't have to assign it to everybody and then just tell, the groups that don't have to do it, hey, don't do this assignment, which is, really counterintuitive and fights against sort of the beauty of the organization a learning management system provides you. So make sure you take advantage of that. Another thing, while we're on classes, going back to here, consider this. I know a lot of you do ensemble contests and so forth, festivals, solo and ensemble contests and festivals in the spring semester. Consider creating classes for small groups that just serve a temporary function. So in other words, within my orchestra program, let's say I split them, my top players, I split them up into 3-string quartets. I could create 3-string quartet classes, put just those 4 students in there, and simply use that class outside of their normal class as a conduit for me to give them recording opportunities, both as an ensemble when they have the opportunity to meet together and record, and as individual players in ensembles. I know myself, I can remember back over 20 years ago, last time I worked with ensembles in a public school setting, and I was in charge of a very large band program, is the hardest thing always was, and I truly believe solo and ensemble work might be the most worthwhile work that we do in our course of our normal academic years, at least from the competitive aspect in that, where they have to really be autonomous as musicians, is I might give everybody in that ensemble a recording assignment of, look, record the first 16 measures of your part for this clarinet quartet. Record the next 16 measures, record the first 32 measures, and then maybe by the 4th assignment, get together with your other 3 people and record the first 32 measures of the piece or whatever. But doesn't have to be for a grade. I think also as teachers, we're really bad about that. We think everything we ask our kids to do has to have a grade, like that grade is some sort of leverage or something. I think it's really important to get kids to buy into things and do things because they want to do it and because they want to do a good job on it and they want your feedback. So just as a way to do that. Again, I remember my kids, they wouldn't do any work on an ensemble until I sat down with them and got them to do the work. Then they'd go nuts on it. They'd practice their part, they'd work together, they enjoyed playing it together. But until I got them started, until I jump started them, they wouldn't do it. You know, and think about it, as you know, I mean, there's not much motivation there. If you're the 4th clarinet player in a clarinet quartet, your part isn't the most exciting part, maybe playing, you know, tonic dominant and subdominant rhythm patterns or something as you serve as the bass line, maybe for an easier ensemble piece. But when it's an assignment, then they feel more obligated to do it, and you know, moving forward gets them off center, moving forward on the assignment. So consider that for whatever your reasons would be, almost like it's like sectionals within the classes themselves to do things. And again, it doesn't have to be for a grade. It doesn't have to be for anything that's numeric or quantitative, simply just purely musical, them getting able to submit things that you can give them feedback on to make them better musicians and so forth. Next thing I wanted to talk about was managing assignments and so forth. As I'm sure all of you have done, you've created assignments. I'll go into this one. If I go into class overview, if you're in a district, I'm not positive or not, but if you've looked at it or not, but if you come up to the content tab, there's a district library option. And there's also a school library option. So if you all have MusicFirst within a district or within a feeder pattern, you can ask, if it isn't already, those sites to be connected as a district library. If it's just you and maybe a couple other directors or individuals, you can just use your school library within that. But what this allows you to do is anything I create, I can share it through those library tabs. So for instance, let's come in here and say I'm going to share this final exam. So I can come up here to share assessment. And I can pick, do I want to put it in the school share library, the district? And you also have the option for all of MusicFirst. Now, if you do all of MusicFirst, realize we have content managers who are going to vet everything you've put in, both for accuracy and, I'll be honest, grammar and spelling, but also for copyright, making sure we're not going to infringe on any copyright law and so forth. But you don't have to do that. And then eventually, probably within the scope of a few weeks, that will appear in the MusicFirst library in one of our subcategories. But if you're just wanting to share something with your colleague, the easiest thing to do is place things you want to share in your school library. And again, if you want to share them cross campus or outside of your campus, you can do it district library. You don't have to do a description. You do have to pick a grade level. It doesn't have to be the right grade level. You can pick the discipline. You do have to pick one. By default, it goes to general music. Again, that doesn't really matter unless you want to do it. The one thing you do have to do, though, is you have to assign standards to it. Now, with that said, it doesn't have to be the right standards. Sorry, this program's kind of powerful, but it isn't that powerful. And then once I've done that and selected all those, just simply share it. I guess I should do it so it actually comes out. Do I have them all? I didn't do this. So let's say it's middle school. And share the assessment. And then when I come up to my school library, it should have been there. I don't know. I may not have checked all the proper boxes on that, or maybe it's just a matter of it needs to be refreshed. It's still not there. I apologize. But that way, whatever class you're in, whatever user is using it, they have access to those things. So if you do things on a district-wide basis, please take advantage of that, or campus-wide that you want to use things. You don't have to build things from the ground up. The other part of that that's really, I think, important is that when we're in the class overview, you may have noticed, and the way you may have been keeping track of assignments and so forth that you use frequently is making them favorites. The problem with that is your favorites folder can get really, really full. And it might be real counterintuitive to be able to find anything in there. As you can see, for me over 4 years, it's gotten way too full. Now I can go in and unfavorite some of this if I ever would take the initiative to do it and so forth. But the favorites thing is great, but try to reserve it for things that you use almost on a periodic, frequent basis, not something that you just want to, okay, I'm going to use this again one time, and that you can share it other ways. And that is what I wanted to get into on that. Okay. Within software, and this is the only time I'm going to address software during this session, and this is just going to be in practice first because we're on the topic of sharing. With my own exercises in practice first, I'll just open the sample exercise. If I go into the details of this and make this where it's a public exercise, then all I have to do is get this URL to another practice first user. Because right now, as this being in my exercises, only under my user profile is this exercise visible. But if I take this URL and I share that with a colleague and they open practice first and they paste that URL in their what do you call it? In their browser, excuse me. Immediately it will ask them, do you want to add this exercise or whatever it wants to call it to my exercises? And they have it. So if you have gotten, like, let's say you're using a method book that you can't get in practice first and you've imported an awful lot of the information, the XML files or whatever, however you've done it, into practice first, you know, open up a spreadsheet and go through and make sure they're all set to public and copy them and put them in a spreadsheet. And then you've got that library of things that you can share with whoever, any practice first user in the world, really, truly, that can share it. You know, that's sort of the concept behind, I don't know if you've seen this in practice first or not, there is a shared library. This has only been in place for, I don't even think, a calendar year yet. And you can see it's in different categories, but there aren't a large number. Now, these are things that we do through MusicFirst, so they all have to be public domain and they're vetted and so forth. You don't need to use this function to just share between colleagues and so forth. So like if you have like all city orchestra auditions or something, and you put all the files into Practice First and you want everybody else in your citywide district to have those files, you could easily do that just by sharing the URLs of the Practice First exercises. All right. One thing I want to kind of stop and just talk about for a second, I'll go ahead and unshare my screen because I know I can get old to look at, is what we have coming up here, which is a series of academic breaks, some longer than and shorter for some of you, and that. However your experience has been in your online teaching and specifically with MusicFirst to this point, I really think coming back right after Thanksgiving, coming back right after Christmas or semester break, whichever it's referred to in your district, and that is a great time to reestablish things. Just like it is when we're all live in schools, and that a lot of times after breaks is a way to sort of reestablish classroom management procedures and so forth. You can get a fresh start, not nearly as much so as you can at the beginning of the school year, but it does give you a little bit of kind of getting your head up above breath again to kind of get things back in the order the way you want to. I think one thing that a lot of folks do in error when they first start using a learning management system, and specifically MusicFirst, is you immediately are so anxious to duplicate the kinds of assignments and assessments that you do in normal teaching that you give them assignments to complete that are too high of stakes initially. I think it's really important, and I know that ship has flown, already sailed for a lot of you this year, but this is a kind of a chance to reestablish, is give them some very low stakes, or better yet, maybe even no stakes assignments. A recording assignment where they simply just record their name and turn it in. A quiz where they just answer a simple true or false question, if you will, with one question on it. And really what you're trying to validate is, okay, these kids can or perhaps cannot log in. They can open an assignment in a software tool. They can open an assessment. They can submit it. They've gone through the baby steps. But if they couldn't, it wasn't the end of the world. Because I remember, I'll just pick on one of my own children, my daughter, who's a band director in Richardson, Texas. When she first started using MusicFirst, like immediately she gave them like a recording assignment or a Practice First assignment where they had to go in and record a bunch of scales or something. Well, immediately, of course, these kids are, say it's due on Monday morning, these kids procrastinate doing it until Sunday night, and they can't remember their login. And so they're panicky. They whine to their parents. Their parents don't want to go back to work Monday morning. They're all stressed and that. So what does the parent do? They don't call you. They don't email you probably. They call the superintendent, or they call the fine arts director or something like that. Immediately you've got all this angst over something. Whereas if it's a low stakes things to begin with, if they have problems with things, it's not the end of the world. And yeah, kids are going to under pressure. And after they've gotten the instructions, which they didn't pay attention to, they can't log in. They don't remember that they have to, if they're using the app, that they have to have Sight Reading Factory on their phone. If they're using Sight Reading, they need to have that app too. All those little things you go over with them, you need to expect that there's going to be some problems. With that too, I'll tell you another story about my daughter. When she did a pilot for me, this is like 5-6 years ago, with her third band at her school. And it was like about 45 kids in the band, and they'd been using it for 4 or 5 weeks. And she calls me up and goes, I just hate this. This is just awful. And again, this is the lowest band. Okay. I'm not the great achievers here. I'm sure they're wonderful kids and their parents love them and all. But, and she's going, I just hate this. Over half my kids don't do any of it. All right. And she's all panicky because, you know, it's just a parent. I've got half my kids are not doing anything and they're all failing band or whatever. And I stopped her. Her name's Molly. And I said, Molly, think about what this is really telling you. Half those kids, they're not doing this. They've never done anything. You know, as ensemble directors, especially orchestra and band, the biggest instruction and assignment we ever get our kids is go home and practice. It's the most ridiculous assignment in the world to give them. It requires complete autonomy and self-motivation to do. These are concrete things that you can see. And I told my daughter, I said, look, those kids have never been doing anything. Now you know it. Now you can choose. What are you going to do about it? I mean, you're not operating in this fantasy land where they tell you they're practicing. They fill out a practice card and lie, and their parents sign it, which is at least what my parents did for me and what I did the whole time I had to do a practice assignment when we were, taking band by candlelight when I was a beginner. And stuff. So it's really, it's accountability. It's digital accountability. And I know some of you using this are going, man, I have really low participation rates, and I've got all these kids. And of course, in all of education right now, as we've had to move online, that's been a problem with kids doing it. But in truth, I think what it is an awful lot is it's just reality. We're seeing how little our kids actually do in terms of initiative on things. And so we've got to devise strategies. We've got to devise, motivational techniques and that to get them to do things and that. But I think one of those is to make sure it's things that they can gradually do and feel success on when they first start, and being patient with them when they truly do try to do them and maybe don't have, what am I trying to say? That they are having problems, okay, that they actually are trying to do it and so forth. Okay, so there's that. I'm going to shift back to a screen share again. And I do want to leave, I'm just going to go a couple more minutes and then we can go into. If you have not, again, with a break coming up, if you have not explored, and again, this is under content, the MusicFirst library. If you have not explored these libraries, please take some time and do. For any one of you, I know probably a minimum of 60% of it is materials that you have no interest in at all. But with over approaching 5,000 pieces of content in these combined libraries, there's tons that you do have interest in, and people have done the work. And the greatest part about all of this is anything you find in here is 100% editable. So if you don't like the vernacular they're using, if you don't like the number of questions they're asking, whatever aspect of it that you don't can't function, you can use it. But somebody has gone, your fellow users have gone and inserted images and done the design work and such, and you have that to begin with. So if you've never looked at this before, you can go in, find something. And by the way, anything, sorry, that's my phone. Anything you find that sees this binder, these are full courses, full of things to do. But we also have simpler things. So say I want to just go and look at this. So I can just use this unit now or add it to my favorites, and then I'll find that. And then once it's in your favorites, you can go in and edit it. So for instance, there's 9 questions on this first one. Say for where we are right now, I only want to use 4 of the questions and such. So you've got all kinds of things here that you can do. Some of it does require specific software, which you may not have access to. You can either redesign the assignment that uses other software, or perhaps you just reformat the whole assignment if it's something you really want. But you can probably get something out of it in that. So it's a great resource, and it keeps getting better all the time. The other thing you have, and there's a great video on how to use these, is under your resources tab, you have a link to Flipgrid, which I know a lot of you already use, and musictheory.net. And this gives you a way to use both of these platforms within MusicFirst in terms of student submissions, particularly for musictheory.net. This is a wonderful thing that actually makes this a relatively easy to use tool, which if you have large classes, kids using this on their own and submitting things is an organizational nightmare, though it is a really good resource. And of course, on both of those, at least for the free version of Flipgrid, the price is right. It doesn't cost you anything. I'm going to pause now and just see if there are any questions that you have that I can answer. Let me go through
Hey, Keith,
sidebar here. Yeah.
the one question that came up in the chat was talking about assessment groups inside of the classes. And the question was, can you create assessment groups across all classes, or do you have to do it for each individual class's grade book? And I believe the answer is it's on an individual class page basis, but I know that you've used it more than in this aspect.
Yeah, there is a workaround that you could do it for all your classes at once, but if the classes are already created, it's too late. At the beginning of a semester, if I just create a class shell, like just template class, if you will, and set my grade book up, if I duplicate that class multiple times, then the grade book duplicates also. Okay. Other than that, though, like if you've already got 6 periods of classes set up and you want to make assessment groups, you do have to go in. There's some good in that too, though, in that like what I teach this group might be different than what I teach this group for some of you in that. And again, it doesn't take long to make 5 assessment groups and to even to reorganize prior assignments into those assessment groups. You're talking probably a maximum of 5 minutes within each class. So, you know, and it'll be time well spent in terms of the organizational aspects of it for you. Okay. Anybody else? Any questions? I did want to say one thing, if there aren't any questions right now, one other thing I wanted to talk about, because some of you may be aware of this, maybe others aren't, is, and I've been in charge of this program, the Texas Music Education Association elected at the beginning of this academic year, they are using our platform and our base recorder tool to do all of region band, choir, orchestra, mariachi, jazz band statewide through all levels, including the all-state process this entire academic year. And so our recording tool has really gotten put through its paces, if you will. And I just wanted, if you use the recording tool, and I, of course, since we're music teachers, I strongly recommend you do. I hope you do know you can upload a backing track to it, so that if you want that, realize it will, the backing track will not sound on the recording. You'll just hear the student entry if they're recording with headphones or earbuds. In my opinion, that's great. I don't really care about hearing the backing track. I want to hear the student and what they're doing. If you do want the backing track audible, then the recorder picks up whatever's coming through the speakers. So the use of external speakers can be a big help with that. And there is a balance control. It's a very simple, it's the world's simplest balance control, so that they can experiment and get a good balance between their instrument or voice and the backing track. Using the backing track without headphones on a small device like a phone is kind of problematic, because I don't know how many of you have thought about it lately, but your speakers and your microphone are like live right next door to each other on your phone. And so getting a good balance can be real challenging. Not that it can't be done, but it can be real challenging. One thing is, when students submit assignments, if their recording has lots of clicks in it, or if it all of a sudden accelerates, we've discovered that's a sign that their network upload speed is very, very inconsistent. All right, it's very inconsistent. So you want to make sure that they have, you know, excuse the student because they may not have any choices or whatever, but that can happen, especially with longer recordings. By default, you can do, I believe, up to now a 20-minute recording and upload it. But that's going to be even more profound on that, because you have a wider band of time, that if there's a lot of devices using the broadband network in that household, if they're doing this at home or maybe even within your school, that you may have that. And that's the result of that. They can preview their recording before they submit it. But if they're saying, hey, I recorded myself and it sounds like, you know, Mickey Mouse or something afterwards, Mickey Mouse singing, that's what's going on. They need to try to find a better internet connection if they can, if that's possible within that. But you can get some very good recordings with our recording tool, even with just built-in microphones and so forth. I've sampled a number of them through our audition process and that. and they're very accurate in terms of dynamic contrast and tonal intensity, timbral intensity, things like that. Okay.
We've
Any
got
other
another,
questions?
yeah, we've got another question that came in talking about compatibility or communication with Google Classroom. And another was asked specifically Infinite Campus. Do you want to address that, Keith, or do you want me to?
Sure. No, I can. Yeah, it does talk to Google Classroom. And what happens when you set up your MusicFirst account through Google Classroom, and if you get any kind of messaging, just contact support. Because in our overwhelming response to MusicFirst through this fall, when we did your site setups, if you have a newer site, the setting to attach it to Google Classroom may not be active, and somebody with administrator profile can do that for you, or you can just contact support and they'll walk you through the steps. It's really quick and easy. But what I was going to say is, then through Google Classroom, what happens is once a student opens an assignment in Google Classroom, the very first time they will have to log into MusicFirst, but after that, they will never have to log into MusicFirst. It'll memorize the login and take them into it, just straight into it. It doesn't mesh like that with any other learning management system. And in my capacity as a consultant with MusicFirst, I remember about 5 years ago, we really tried to do some work with Schoology and Canvas and some of the other really big players in that field. And really two problems. Every one of them, the integration's different, which for a small company like MusicFirst is a very expensive proposition. And really the more profound problem was those companies are so big, they don't want to mess with it. They don't want to give you the time of day to do it. So yes, you can embed URLs and stuff, web links, if you will, into other learning management systems, but that smooth transition, it just isn't there, unfortunately. So we are a standalone LMS.
Yeah,
So,
and just to expand on that a little bit for those listening, anytime you create a specific task or a specific assessment inside of MusicFirst, it generates and creates a unique web address for that specific task. So you can copy that web address and then paste it into any of those other systems like Schoology or Canvas, and post that into those. And that is a workaround that I've got a number of schools that, maybe the district mandates that you utilize Canvas, or they mandate that you're using Schoology because everybody's using it. That's what they're doing, is they're taking the unique web address for the specific assignment, copying that and pasting it into their class page on
and
the school system.
so the student behavior, what they're going to see, they'll click on that, say within Infinite, they'll click on that URL, and the first thing it'll do, it'll open up MusicFirst, and they'll have to log in, and then it'll go right to the assignment. So it's not like it's, I mean, there's an extra step in there, and they have to use their MusicFirst login. Okay. Any other questions? You can feel free to unmute and ask too at this point if you'd like to. Well, I appreciate you all coming today, and please, any suggestions you would have for webinars you would like to see, Mike and I are planning on doing these periodically every 2 or 3 weeks throughout both the upcoming weeks and then in the spring semester. So, we're here to help in whatever way possible. Almost every single person involved with MusicFirst has a very strong connection in their background with education and so forth. And this really is about providing a great product for all of music education and for the benefit of your students, first and foremost.